You know what woke means? It means you're a loser. Everything woke turns to shit.
Something weird is happening. Growing up, you used to buy a pair of Nike Air Jordans because you wanted to be like Mike, the greatest basketball player of all time.
Michael Jordan has won it for Chicago!
People bought Jordans because they were cool. But in 2016, Colin Kaepernick took a knee during the national anthem in protest of police brutality and racial injustice in the United States, which sparked a heated debate in the nation.
As far as I'm concerned, Colin Kaepernick is absolutely irrelevant. I don't want to see him again. I don't want to hear from him again.
I think they may see that Kaepernick helps their business just as he's helping Nike's business.
Nike capitalized on this moment and built an entire ad campaign around the cause, signaling its solidarity with Kaepernick. To me, this felt disingenuous, as if Nike was trying to capitalize on this moment in our culture. And this was just the beginning. Today, companies are throwing their weight behind social issues to the point where buying a chicken sandwich or a cup of coffee has become a political statement. Everything feels so heavy where if you buy from a place someone doesn't agree with, you risk making a statement you didn't intend to make. And that feels off to me. So I went on a deep dive. How did we get here? How did for-profit companies become platforms for social change? Are companies being genuine when they say they care about a social cause? Or is it just another attempt to make a profit? This is a story about the transformation of corporate America and how social activism blurred the line between money and morality. My name is Raf, and this is Failure and Future. To understand how we got here, we have to start at the beginning. Modern companies are one of the most important inventions humans have ever made, and it starts with the idea of limited liability. Let's say we have a man named Mike, who dreams of running his own business and driving a Porsche. So he decides to open up a barbershop. After a couple months, business is booming. Now Mike wants to expand his business and open barbershops in other towns. To do this, he needs to hire managers to run his new shops. But entrusting people with what you've created is a risky proposition. Mike can personally ensure that the floors in his shop are clean and there's no hair on the ground. But it's impossible to guarantee clean floors if Mike scales his business to 2, 10, or 500 locations. Suppose somebody slips and falls in one of Mike's many shops. Because he's the owner, he can be sued for damages, which could lead to personal bankruptcy, in which he would lose the Porsche and his house. The reality is, every business has disgruntled customers and employees. If entrepreneurs like Mike could be sued whenever something went wrong in one of their stores, people would never scale their business. And if that happens, we would have fewer places to shop and fewer places to find a job. Not only that, the only people who would take the risk of scaling their business would be extremely wealthy individuals who could handle the risk of liability. The modern corporation solved both of these problems in one fell swoop. A company is just a legal invention, a bunch of words written on a piece of paper. But this paper protects people like Mike when something inevitably goes wrong in their business. And that's a good thing because it makes entrepreneurship available to anyone with ambition and a good idea, not just wealthy individuals. Limited liability is also why Donald Trump can declare corporate bankruptcy 6 times and still be a billionaire. Now, the real story with limited liability isn't about Mike and his small business at all. The real reason limited liability is so important is because it empowers entrepreneurs to raise capital from outside investors to build businesses they could never have possibly built on their own. In today's world, conducting a clinical trial to develop a life-saving medicine, starting an aerospace company, or building a 5G network is incredibly risky and requires a ton of capital. If an investor puts up $100 into developing a new medicine, and things go south where the investor is held personally liable, meaning the investor could lose their house and all of their personal assets, they would never invest in the first place. Under limited liability, the only risk an investor takes is losing the $100 they put into the business. That is what limited liability is all about. Without it, we wouldn't have the iPhone, the cure to hepatitis C, or electric cars. However, limited liability has created another problem. Because corporations can become these monstrous behemoths, they inadvertently wield a ton of power. Before the modern corporation, chartered companies like the Dutch East India Company became so powerful that they had a private army of 10,000 soldiers, 40 warships, and their own currency. The good news is that the people who invented the American corporation thought of this. They knew that limited investor liability was necessary to grow the economy, but it could also create a monster that could eventually overthrow the government. So they crafted a counterintuitive solution by legally mandating that a business's sole purpose be to maximize shareholder value. This is known as fiduciary duty. It is the legal obligation of all company employees, managers, executives, and board members to act in the best interest of company shareholders. Meaning, it is everyone's duty to maximize profits and increase the stock price. If you go against this, that is when you can be held personally liable, and why guys like Sam Bankman-Fried and Bernie Madoff went to prison. Fiduciary duty is a good thing, because it restricts a business's purpose and obligation, so we do not have to worry about billionaires like Mark Zuckerberg building an army at Meta, taking over countries, or overthrowing the government. This is shareholder capitalism. The belief that a company's sole purpose is to maximize profits and financial returns to investors above all else. In practice, we learned that being singularly focused on maximizing profits and shareholder value over everything else can lead to bad things happening. It can lead to employee exploitation, poor working conditions, environmental catastrophes, and excessive risk-taking. And this all came to a head in 2008 when greed ultimately caused the Great Recession.
It was the worst day on Wall Street since the crash of 1987.
Let's talk about the speed with which we are watching this market deteriorate.
Now it's official, we are in a recession.
At no fault of their own, people found themselves without jobs and homes because some investment banker made a bad bet.
Easy credit combined with the faulty assumption that home values would continue to rise led to excesses and bad decisions.
Despite the signs of fraud and excessive risk-taking, the banks were still bailed out, executives still got their bonuses, and nobody was held accountable for the damages done thanks to limited liability. People hated corporate America, and the business world knew this. It was no longer enough to be accountable only to shareholders.
Too many were motivated only by the appetite for quick kills and bloated bonuses. Those on Wall Street cannot resume taking risks without regard for consequences.
Businesses needed to be held accountable for the benefit of their broader community if they were ever going to regain people's trust. This is stakeholder capitalism, the belief that a corporation must benefit all stakeholders, its employees, customers, communities, and the environment. This idea that a corporation must benefit society, not just shareholders, took off after the Great Recession. So, how do you reward the companies that help their communities and punish the companies that hurt society? Enter ESG. ESG stands for Environmental, Social, and Governance Standards. It's basically a report card on how well a company aligns with social and environmental causes. The pitch is that companies focused on diversity, inclusion, and environmental sustainability are safer bets for long-term success. Now, things get dicey because asset management giants like BlackRock and Vanguard will use this rating to determine whether or not they will invest their billions. These two firms are among the most powerful institutions in the world, and they're in the business of owning businesses. Combined, they are the largest shareholders in 88% of the companies in the S&P 500, with over $20 trillion in assets under their control. That's about 75% of the total US GDP. These firms hold a lot of power over companies, and a CEO's job often boils down to keeping these investors happy. Through ESG, companies are now financially incentivized to be committed to social and political issues. This is where things get spicy. Financially incentivizing companies to take a stance on complicated social issues, while noble, has had major unintended consequences. I'm going to talk about two issues that I believe best explains why corporate activism has made things messy. The first issue is that ESG has unintentionally shifted power away from democratically elected officials to the asset managers working at companies like BlackRock. Take the case of ExxonMobil. BlackRock, along with other ESG investors, used its shareholder voting power to push for environmentally focused directors on ExxonMobil's board. This move was part of an effort to force Exxon to shift its business strategy away from fossil fuels and toward renewable energy. It was a highly controversial move because such dramatic fundamental changes to a company's business are usually reserved for government regulators, not private investors with an agenda. And let's say you agree with BlackRock's strong-arming Exxon to become more environmentally sustainable. There's now a precedent that any investor can push whatever social issue you might disagree with onto big, highly influential corporations. And thanks to limited liability, these investors cannot be held accountable for the changes they drive that impact you and me. ESG standards are loosely defined and not standardized, which leaves institutional investors a ton of wiggle room to drive whatever change they care about without legal repercussions. The second issue is that ESG has turned really important social issues into a bullshit box-ticking exercise. There are so many examples of companies taking a stance on an issue as a marketing stunt, but their actions show they actually don't give a damn. For example, Volkswagen and its infamous clean diesel scandal. The German automaker marketed its diesel cars as environmentally friendly, claiming reduced emissions and superior fuel efficiency.
Jetta TDI clean diesel. TDI set a Guinness World Record 58 miles per gallon.
However, it was later revealed that Volkswagen had installed software designed to cheat emissions tests.
So let's be clear about this. Our company was dishonest. And in my German words, we have totally screwed up.
These cars were emitting pollutants at levels far higher than advertised, even though they were sold under the guise of sustainability. Another example is with State Street, a prominent Wall Street firm managing over $4 trillion in assets, and its Fearless Girl statue. The statue was positioned to face down the famous Wall Street Bull. This move was celebrated as a symbol of gender diversity and women's empowerment. Yet, at the same time, State Street was involved in lawsuits alleging that it paid female employees less than their male counterparts. The Fearless Girl campaign was just a PR stunt to boost the firm's image, while internally their actions contradicted its public stance on gender equality. A third example involves Goldman Sachs.
The board must have at least one person who is not white, male, or straight.
In 2020, Goldman announced that it would no longer take companies public unless they had at least one diverse board member, which was part of its commitment to promote equality and diversity. This move was highly praised and applauded by many. However, at the same time, Goldman Sachs was at the center of the 1MDB scandal.
These charges stem from Goldman Sachs' central role in a massive global scheme to loot billions of dollars from the government-run Malaysian investment fund known as 1MDB.
One of the largest financial frauds in history. Goldman Sachs paid over $5 billion in fines for its role in a scheme that stole billions from the Malaysian government. When companies take these very public stances to promote their care for a social issue, a lot of the time it's just a marketing tactic designed to boost their public image and distract from the actual underlying systemic problems we need to fix. And when we're constantly being bombarded with all this moral and virtue signaling, we end up doubting the cause itself. The fakeness surrounding the issue ends up undermining the very social cause these companies claim to support. Put simply, money and morality do not mix. We need to go back to a world where companies are focused on competing by producing the best products and services, and stop letting for-profit companies be platforms of social change. So what is the right way to address complicated social issues? In the United States, there are 3 ways to do it. The first, and one of the most impactful ways to drive social change, is to create great products that align with the cause you care about. For example, take Upside Foods, a company revolutionizing the food industry by cultivating meats from animal cells. This approach addresses not only the ethical concerns about animal slaughter, but also reduces the environmental impact of traditional meat production. Upside Foods is focused on creating a superior product that simultaneously advances sustainability and animal welfare. And if you're weirded out by lab-grown meats, companies like Beyond Meat focus on creating plant-based products that taste better than meat and are better for you. Another example is Tesla. They made the electric car sexy. Their mission is to accelerate the world's transition to sustainable energy. And they're doing this by creating cars and products that are better than anything on the market. The second way to drive social change in this country is to start and support nonprofit organizations and community initiatives. Not every social issue requires a corporate solution. Sometimes the most effective way to make a difference is through targeted nonprofit work or philanthropy. By funding organizations already equipped to address specific social problems, people can support the cause without overstepping their expertise. And lastly, the most important way to promote social change is to participate in democracy. Our government is designed to give every individual a voice in shaping the rules and values of our society. While it's tempting to pressure corporations to step in and fill the gaps, true systemic change comes from people like you and me engaging in the democratic process. This means voting, advocating for policies, and holding elected officials accountable. When we get this balance right, we can create a world where innovation, compassion, and policy work together to drive meaningful change. But when we rely too heavily on corporations to play a role they weren't designed for, we risk undermining the very values we are trying to protect.